Thank everybody for being here. Hopefully we won't keep you too long today. Do a few little pieces of business and move on. But I appreciate you being here for our second meeting of our study committee. And before we get started, Brother Allen's got to visit a few more folks back there. He's our committee's got a couple out today. And y'all remember to keep Tom Taylor. I don't know if everybody knows his dad passed away first of last week, I think it was, wasn't it? Down in somewhere around Florida. I read the obituary on the gentleman. He was quite a man, and I'm sure Tom and them are still probably still taking care of family down there. So let's remember him. But before we get started, we'll have a word of prayer, and then we'll get into our meeting. Before we do, thank you for this day. Thank you for the ability to come out and try to take care of the business of the state of Georgia. We thank you for these that are representatives, all these that work to support the legislature. Lord, we thank you for these people that work in the industries that we work in. And Lord, we just pray that you'd bless each and every one. Ask you to be with Tom's family this week, Lord, and continue to lift them up and give them your peace, the peace that only you can give at a time like this. Lord, bless our deliberations, bless our decision-making, give us wisdom and knowledge as we go through this work. Thank you again for the breath of life this morning. Go with us now. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right. Got a couple little things we're going to maybe talk about today. I know I got to get the mic up here because I think they're going to have us. Yeah, we got the red light on. Brett's here with us today, so he won't be watching from somewhere down in Florida somewhere. Thank you, Brother Harold, for the text and the information you shared with us at our last meeting while you were on the beach.
I was doing industry research.
No doubt, 10 o'clock in the morning. I think you've got some handouts that's been given out. Everybody got a copy of what we're looking at? Want to make sure you're. If not, we have any more copies up here? Anybody need a copy?
I've got a few. I'm just going to put them down on the table.
All right, we'll put them down here so y'all can, we don't want anybody to be in the dark about what we're looking at here. What is it? Transparency and openness. I believe that's the
Maxim.
well, that's the maximum transparency and openness. Yeah. Now, at our last meeting, we asked for input from the groups that come here, all the associations, all the different groups. We asked you guys to give us some input on what we're trying to be about. I did not bring a copy of the House resolution again. Don't think I have a copy here, but this is a committee to review the Title III of the Georgia Code for clarification purposes, trying to not do substantive changes, but just clarify and make this thing easier to follow, easier to read, doing away with obsolete provisions, making changes that we think are necessary to help our citizens out here understand what's actually in the code, and keep it a little, maybe some help to the departments that do the regulations in the code. And the only one that's come forward with any suggestions that we've actually seen in hand is Mr. Ed McGill. So, Brother Ed, if you'll come up, you want to come up and share with us what you want to present to us and the work you've done on this. And again, if anybody out in any of the other industry associations have ideas, we would like to hear from you before we start putting this thing together.
Excuse me, I'm Ed McGill with Georgia Alcohol Business Association. We represent almost 500 packaged liquor stores throughout Georgia. I sent the committee a letter and a copy of to the committee members and Sean Marie, kind of detailing, Mr. Chairman, what you had asked me to do to spell out some of the things we commented on last time. That letter's, I hope, in your file, dated July 31st. I first want to say I want to thank Professor Harrell for reviewing my document, because I told him a while ago I was glad he didn't grade my term papers back in school days, because I would have probably not done so well. But at any rate, I appreciate you for looking at that. For example, on the first page where it says 18, number 18, we should have, for clarification's sake, retail consumption on-premise liquor dealer, underlining on-premise liquor for clarification. On the second page, 19.2, on the second line where it says the unbroken package, following that, not for consumption on the premises. In other words, package, comma, not for consumption, underline, on the premises, for consistency with what I mentioned on the first page. Mr. Harrell, if you'll help me keep straight here.
All right, now let me go back right there. Now, what you've actually got on the handout right here says that retail only consumers are not for resale. But okay, and it says buy the unbroken package on the premises. I see that. I was skipping. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that not for consumption clarifies a little bit further. The next line, 19.3, for the same reason, second line, unbroken package, comma, not for consumption on the premise, not for consumption, underlined, is the way that should have read. Now, I mentioned down in the last paragraph several code sections following up the Revenue Department's comments on looking at some wine statutes. Just for clarification's sake, I want to mention what those were. 3621 is bond requirements. 22 is wine shipper license requirements. 625 is requirements to buy wine from wholesalers. 626 is requirements for storage of wine. 6.261 is requirements for invoices for transported products. 627 is registration required by the commissioner. 631 is special order shipping licenses to ship wine to consumers. And 632 is conditions under which a wine shipper can ship to consumers. These sections are probably, in at least our view, the most violated sections of the code section in the state of Georgia, and I have contended for quite some time that the state's losing a lot of revenue. But I also at the same time mentioned that that may be something you want to look at separately, because you, as Mr. Chairman said earlier, you didn't want to get into any detailed revamp of these things, but some of them we think needs to be looked at. That's pretty much the story. I didn't have any other changes, but I'm ready, I hope, to answer any questions y'all might have relative to my comments and extending our thoughts a little bit from the first time. Now, the main thrust of this is to have wine and beer licenses. Right now, a wine license, when the Revenue Department issues it, is just a wine license. It doesn't distinguish between a package and a consumption on premise license. It's just a wine license. Same thing with beer. Beer license is a beer license, not for package, not for consumption on premise. And the Revenue Department alluded to this the last time, and I think Mr. Tyler, and I'd rather them comment on that, but that was following their suit of needing clarification on that part of the statute.
Okay.
And like I said, I yield any questions that y'all might have.
Committee members have any questions this time?
I do want to mention one other thing, Mr. Chairman. Our association's involved in, with legal counsel. There's an attempt in Georgia right now to violate the two-store limitation law, beneficial interest in that code. We're very concerned about it, and I don't know exactly what legal action we're going to take, but if that license is issued, we will be in court fairly soon thereafter. And our folks feel very strong. It's good state policy. It's served the state well, and we hope it stays intact. But there's an effort to see it go away.
Okay.
So just to, if you get some information from us, that's what it's going from lawyers and stuff. We'll keep this committee informed of how we proceed on it.
Okay.
And otherwise, we thank you for what you do.
Well, appreciate that, sir. Thank you for working this up and coming and presenting it to us. Any questions? Any thoughts or comments from the audience out here? Y'all have had a chance to look at this. Y'all got any yays or nays, feelings one way or the other on making these changes? All right. We don't hear anybody. Revenue Department. Sean, have y'all got anything on that or any feelings one way or the other? What y'all?
Had the internal meetings yet to flush this out, so we don't have any
Okay. No comments at this time? All right. Brett, do you have anything? I know you've worked heavily with Ed and others on this. Anything that you'd want to say on this, or any of the committee members?
I certainly.
What's your number? What's your number there, sir?
23.
Okay.
I certainly like and applaud the effort. I think he's trying to bring some clarity. We do need to look at it a little further. The one issue that we might need to consider, it's my understanding that the department issues somewhere over 16,000 licenses each year now, and we may need to see how these additional license requirements would impact that, the number of licenses issued, and whether or not there's a way to achieve the same goal of clarity on what type of license you have on premise, off premise, what have you, without greatly expanding the burden on both those that are getting licenses and the departments issuing it. But I appreciate the effort. And I think it is. I think it's well. I think the intent is very, very good.
Now help me out. The licenses are issued. Are these new and renewals? Or is that new licenses are issued every year, or?
It's my understanding, and the department may need to clarify, but it's that these licenses are an annual license, so they have to be renewed each year.
That these are.
And there's of the licenses currently, the various licenses currently offered, there's I believe somewhere over 16,000 issued.
Okay.
So we just need to make sure we take that into consideration as we move forward and on any changes to licensing.
That could generate a burden there to perhaps have maybe a third, half of those if they had to be redone or renamed. But we'll look at that. Anything else? Alan, anything from you?
No.
Had a good 2 days, hadn't you?
DUIs yesterday and alcohol today.
Hand in hand. Representative Martin, anything today? All right, we're going to take this into consideration, and we'll be looking at it again. The folks out here, you guys are the ones that have to work in this in your association, so you need to give us your thoughts if there's something you see going askew. All right, Mr. Harrell, you have done a Herculean job on working on some issues here. I think you've got a list of 121 items that you have looked at various and sundry times, and I would ask you to share with us some of your thoughts on some of the stuff you've done. And again, you've got that list, I believe. Everybody has a copy of that right there, and we want to pare that down somewhat before we start getting into the meat of any legislation. Okay. Well, we'll go over that, but he's got some high points I think he wants to share with us.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have, over the last several months, developed just a working document that, taking the charge of the committee, was designed to look at, outdated sections, undefined terms, obsolete terms, and various issues within the title that over the years have become difficult to work with or no longer necessary. The total goal and the outcome, as I understand it, is to improve clarity and compliance with the title, and that this particular task force is not charged with making any substantive changes to the law. So what I did today is I prepared just a little 3-page kind of overview of the larger document you just referred to, Mr. Chairman, to give some examples of issues that we may want to look at for consideration for revision and cleanup. If there's anyone here interested that did not receive a copy of the memo, if you'll just see me afterwards, I'll make sure you get a copy. If you're anyone here interested, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment, about the working document that has the 122 items, that if you don't have it and want a copy of that, I'll be glad to get you a copy of that as well. But for those that do have a copy of the memo, again, I think I'm kind of approaching this mission to improve clarity and compliance from the standpoint of a rearrangement of the title. I think would go a long way toward achieving that, and that is to say, perhaps we take a section of the title and label it definitions, and all the definitions used throughout the title are then combined into a section on definitions. There might be a section on licensing and occupational taxes. That would be a heading, and so all your various licenses, such as those that Mr. McGill just talked about, would be brought from all the various chapters and all the various pages into a single section to make it easy to find and easy to understand, or easier, hopefully, to understand what licenses you may be required to have as a practitioner in the industry, and certainly potentially improve compliance there. And then you may have other sections that dealt with violations, for example, or whatever. But the idea was to try to group the various items that are throughout the code into a manner that improves clarity, improves compliance, and ease of use and understanding. Understand that that is not a small task. When you start rearranging these various code sections, clearly we want to be mindful of any unintended consequence, going to be mindful of all references, and that so it will take quite a bit of work to do something such as that nature. I've spent time with beginning discussions with many people that are involved in the industry at all different levels of the industry. Haven't talked to everybody yet, but we're still early in this process. And thus far, while no one, don't misunderstand anything that I say as an endorsement of the process, but thus far everyone seems to be receptive to considering that there could be improvement in clarity of the title by making a rearrangement, and there certainly are improvements to be made, and there certainly are outdated references and terms that could be updated or repealed. So with that, on this 3-page memo, I've given a couple of samples of the types of items that I'm looking at, and I'm sure most of y'all are familiar with the title itself in this year's red edition. But for example, malt beverage is defined on page 2 of our title in 31213, and yet we commonly know malt beverage is beer, but the term beer is never actually defined in the title. So you have a definition of malt beverage in 31213, and then if you turn back to 3520A, the state is issuing a license for a retailer of beer. So we have the state issuing a license for something that is not defined, beer, and yet we define malt beverage, and there's no, in 3520, there's no license for malt beverage. And again, common practice, we understand that we're talking about the same item, but that's kind of an issue that ought to be addressed, that could be clarified, and doesn't rise to the level of a substantive change in the code. The next example I'll give, there's obsolete definitions. When I suggest that some definitions ought to be modified to reflect what's actually happening in the marketplace today. And again, in our current definition code, section 31221, again, we define a standard case, and one of the definitions of a standard case is 24 containers of 375 milliliters. So we're defining a standard case in milliliters. And then if you go further into code at 3512, for the purposes of one chapter, chapter 5 only, we define a case, not a standard case, but just a case. And that definition of a case happens to be in ounces instead of milliliters, which is confusing a little bit, makes it translate. And then throughout that chapter, the definition of case that we just defined is never used. So the definition that's at the beginning of that chapter is then never used anywhere in Chapter 5. So again, and quite frankly, the first draft at the meeting that I missed, the LC 362572, has already identified that as something that should be repealed or corrected, that case definition. But again, it's something that causes confusion. Is it a standard case? Is it a regular case? Does it apply to this chapter? Does it not? It needs to be cleaned up. Doesn't make any substantive change to the industry, and that's the type of issue we're faced with. On the second page of the memo, again, it's kind of a continuation of that same thing. There's inconsistent references. 3563 imposes a state excise tax in excess of 572 ounces or 2 standard cases. Now remember, a case is standard case is milliliters, but we're taxing in excess of ounces. So again, you can sit down and do the math and figure out what that threshold might be, or the equivalency might be. But for someone like me, a layman, that's not an attorney or not a practitioner in the industry, those are kind of confusing and somewhat appear to be conflicting ideas. And if you refer back to that definition of a standard case, it just doesn't fit easily in that code section where it's used. The next example I give is talks about obsolete definitions. And on code section 341, we defined a distiller as a manufacturer. Just that simple. A distiller is a manufacturer. And then we go to 31214, and it defines a manufacturer, which we just called, remember, a manufacturer is a distiller. Now we just define a manufacturer as any maker, producer, bottler of an alcoholic beverage. So I guess that could be an alcoholic beverage of any kind. And then the term also means, in the case of spirits, any person that distills, rectifies, or blends those spirits with wine to produce fortified wine. And then if we go to 3420, the state then imposes a state license tax on any distiller and manufacturer. So are they the same? Are they different in one case and not another? But again, from a layman's perspective, it seems that there's an opportunity to bring clarity there in those definitions, and if we can improve the definition and the clarity and the reference, then I would suggest that it improves our compliance with the intent of the section. That same issue that we just discussed with distiller and manufacturer and so forth follows on to the next paragraph with regard to the definition of a fruit grower. And a fruit grower is defined as any person that grows peaches, apples, pears, perishable fruits, and who manufactures distilled spirits. So now again, we're using the terms again, manufacturer and distilled spirits and fruit grower, and when you use those terms and then try to fit it into the definition of a distiller in 341 or a manufacturer in 312, it makes the fit and the consistency of the terms very difficult. So again, I think this is another example of where the obsolete terms or an inconsistent reference, the charge of the task force, can be improved again without substantially impacting any of the actual operations of the industry. The next one just is to revise an obsolete practice, and this is something that's simple. 33242 requires the Department of Revenue to prepare, print, and distribute notices. Well, we all know today you go to the website, it's a PDF file, you download it. So it's just a simple terminology change. They don't need to prepare, print, distribute. They just need to make it available. So but it's just a simple update to keep the code modern with what the practice is today. There are several provisions in the title that I've been informed have been deemed unconstitutional, some of which apparently have been litigated all the way through to the Supreme Court, others maybe not that high. But the next example is one where Article 3 of Chapter 3, which is located in Code Section 3340 to 3346, has been adjudicated, has been found unconstitutional. It was actually included in a true code revision bill last year, coming through the Code Revision Committee to be removed. Passed the House, no objections. Passed the Senate committees, no objections. Just didn't make it to the floor in time. But that's something that, again, it remains in the title, but it's been ruled unconstitutional. So it's a cleanup that we ought to consider. I've left several other examples here. Some of them are very simple. Throughout the title, the Commissioner of the Department of Revenue is either authorized or permitted through a shall or may to promulgate rules and regulations. The next inconsistent reference at 342B adds an adjective that qualifies those rules and regulations and says they ought to be reasonable. Well, being a non-attorney, when I say reasonable in front of that regulation, I said, well, that's a lot for the attorneys to bill over. What's reasonable? So since that's the only place it appears, that adjective reasonable ought to be removed and allow the commissioner, just as he does everywhere else in the code, to promulgate rules and regulations. The last item on page 2 talks about unconstitutional, unenforceable provisions, and this deals with signage, and it's in Section 343, where currently the state is regulating whether signs can be illuminated or unilluminated, and the height of letters and so forth. And again, in your first meeting, the draft identified that issue as being something that ought to be repealed. And in common practice today, our local jurisdictions have their sign ordinances that govern. So I think that's something, as you say, that has already been identified, ought to be looked at for repeal. The last page, in Code Section 3463, it requires that all alcohol spirits manufactured in the state for sale in the state shall be made from Georgia-grown products. And while I think we ought to encourage Georgia-grown wherever possible, I believe the mandate may be unnecessarily intrusive and could potentially have other issues too. So I just identify that one as one we may need to review. The next item deals with different tax treatment between the various types of alcohol. And for example, in Code Section 3480A, and one of the things that would probably be real illustrative, Code Section 3480A is on page 52. Well, see, I've already written it down, so I know where to turn. Had I not done that, it would take me a lot longer. But on 3480, page 52, the local governments may, is permissive, levy an excise tax on distilled spirits. And then if you look at 3660A, which is on page 86, I have to flip back over now to page 86, it says that the local government may, is permissive, levy an excise tax on wine. And then if you look at 3580, which is on page 74, it says the local government shall, mandatory, the state mandates that the local government shall impose an excise tax on malt beverages. At least we use the right term here, malt beverage instead of beer, so that's good. But I think we ought to consider equal application here, and it would be my recommendation that the shall in 3580 be changed to a may to make it consistent with spirits and wine with regard to the local government's ability to impose an excise tax. This particular tax collected by the wholesaler. This is not the retail tax that appears to be a sales tax, so that it's consistent treatment between the flavors. And the last example that I'll give today is a repeal of an obsolete section 3521 that provides the commissioner may prescribe regulations requiring the bottles and cans to bear the word Georgia or GA. And those of you that are as old as I am remember all those old stamps on labels, but apparently it hadn't been done since 1997, and it's, you know, so it's just, again, something that's obsolete that might be worthy of consideration from removing from the code. Those are a few examples of the types of issues that I've worked with many of the people in this room to identify. And so what I've got is a working document that has 122 of those types of items that I just described. And what of those that I've met so far, the kind of the tact I've taken, and I hope the committee will support continuing down this road, is that any interested party on their own accord, without the need for a second or anybody else's support, can remove any item on this list for any reason. Just say, I don't want to tackle that, or for whatever reason. So that 122 would drop to, and there have been 6, I'm calling them vetoes, there have been 6 vetoes already. So although there's 122 things on this working document, 6 of them, as far as I'm concerned, are already off the table. And what I am suggesting and asking the committee to consider is to allow me to continue to work, or the committee to obviously to get work with the various interested parties and see how small that list gets. Does it get down to 10 items? Does it get down to 30 items? Or what is that number that everyone participating in the industry would agree that that definition needs to change, or that section is no longer enforced? And that might very well be a great basis for a bill that meets the charge of this committee to update and clarify the code. And again, by allowing every member on their own accord that's interested in this to remove something from the list, that should help ensure too that whatever that end document is not something of controversy. That's not something that's going to be debated by one interested party over the other, and be something that hopefully then could go through the process with the broad support of all the different industry participants. So I guess at the end of the day, if it's appropriate, my request is to hear from the committee on whether or not that is a worthwhile way to proceed through this process, and if so, in going through that process, whittling this list down, and then looking at a rearrangement of the title, I would recommend that first section we look at might be the occupational licenses and fees, putting all those licenses and fees into a single section. If we do that, it would allow us to review the suggestion by Mr. McGill. Obviously, those would be that license and fees. It's also probably one of the portions that, you know what the license is, you know what the fee is. There ought not to be any, debate amongst the members, and it would be just an opportunity to see what that process is to move these things from all the different sections. Is that something that's doable in a reasonable amount of time? What type of other issues does it cause? And then if we're successful with that first step with licenses and fees, then we can move on to the next item, maybe the excise tax section, and then maybe then the definition section. Each of those sections becoming, more and more detailed in the amount of work that would be required, and obviously would take more time of all the industry people that are interested in the industry, because the key is, of course, obviously to have their input and throughout the entire process, so that whatever we ultimately end up with is something that has the broad support of all the interested parties. So there's my however long it took overview of what I've been doing.
You've been a busy guy, and I appreciate that. I think we've got a starting point here between what you've done and what Mr. McGill has done. And if it would be comments from the audience out here, anything on what he's talked about? Do y'all have any real issues with what Brett's talked about so far? Chairman Harrell, Representative Harrell. I think we're going to have to bite it off a little piece at a time. Not try to go in and take the whole thing and do a massive undertaking, but see what's going to be workable, worthwhile with the efforts we've got. Representative Powell.
Thank you,
Share
Mr.
with us.
Chairman. I applaud Brett. He's done a great job in dealing with the industry and such. I do have an interesting just comment I'd like to make, and that and I know that he's eager to, and he's just a very accommodating kind of a guy. And but our mission is supposed to be, hopefully we only do this once in a blue moon, and that's clean up non-substantive changes in the code. But for those that in the veto process you're talking about, if they're going to register, whether it be the Revenue Department or the stakeholders or whoever it may be, if they're going to register a concern or a veto per se on any particular item that you've looked at, I'd like for you to keep those in check for us so we can look at it, and then we can discuss that to see if in fact that's just a misunderstanding or whether it's something that can be dealt with. Because if we're only going to clean this up once every so many years, and I don't think this has been cleaned up I don't even think it since I've been here. But let's get it cleaned up and let's do it right. And it's an open process to the stakeholders, revenue, government officials, and such. But let's keep a grip on it, because ultimately the final decision doesn't rest with them; it rests with the legislators and the members of this committee. So let's, you said you've had 6 already. I'd like to see at the end of the day which issues we're talking about, so that we can maybe work around these.
All right, that's a good point. When you've got this complicated an issue and as many stakeholders involved, there's always as Brett's already mentioned, unintended consequences. We want to stay away from that as much as possible. That generally happens more than we like in legislation that we pass down here. Something will happen that has unintended consequences. And then, as Representative or Chairman Powell's brought up, misunderstandings. Doesn't happen down here, does it? People don't get confused on the issues or which way the one person's thoughts may be going this way and somebody else sees it an entirely different way. So there may be some issues where we need to sit down and have a little clarity, have a little discussion to make sure we're all on the same page and that we're not striking something that does have merit in being looked at. Thank you, Chairman Powell. I appreciate those thoughts there. Again, you're the industry folks out here, the Revenue Department, and all you folks that deal in the industry on a daily basis. We want to make this easier for you guys. Legislators, we look at the laws, we pass the laws, but you guys have to implement what we put in play and what the Revenue Department says out here. So at the end of the day, it's going to be what's going to affect your business and your people out here that are having to work in the industry. So we want to make it easier on you as much as possible, not just for us to come up here and say, okay, this is something we want to do. Let's do this, this, and this. We need your input. But that's what we're here for. That's what we need you for. If you see something that you really think is, we're running off the track with it, tell us. Tell us before we get too far down the road out here. I appreciate Representative Harrell, what you've done on this, the work you've put in place. Is there any comments from the audience this morning? We'll get you the list to look at. Representative Harrell can email that out to anybody that wants it. I think we're going to start taking a look at some of these issues. We'll probably, some of us start, I know Representative Harrell already has, but talk with our legislative counsel, and appreciate her working with Representative Harrell on looking at some of these code sections. And we're also going to be talking with the Revenue Department and other stakeholders, and we may get together, a few of us, and have a little working session so we can start getting something to present to you guys, so you'll know what we're looking at. I'll try to get a few of the committee members. We will probably have a working session ourselves just to sit down and spend several hours hammering out some of these issues. Get around the table, get the books out, get the code sections, and say, okay, if we do this, if we do this, if we do this, you know, what's it going to look like? We get you guys something at the next meeting that you can have in your hands to you know, have a good idea where we're going. That sound all right with the committee?
Yes.
Representative Martin, you got anything to share with us this morning?
Appreciate Representative work on that.
I tell you, he was a.
I was wondering if he might prepare us a converter from milliliters to ounces.
I bet he could do that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Even if he had to take a couple of different cans and, you know. Yeah, I think he's into the liquids here pretty well. Well, we've been here less than an hour, and you guys, I'm not hearing anything out of you. Revenue Department, what do you guys got to share with us? Anything at all that y'all have, at this point in time? Are you going to be able to perhaps meet with us sometime and let us sit down and have a little working session to go over some of these items and see how it's going to play with what you guys are doing? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question relative to, it's going to sound a little bit odd, but I think somebody in this industry may know. I know that the tragedy in California with the earthquake was in the Napa Valley, which is known for its wine. We heard a lot of things that barrels and things got over there. I'm just curious from a consumer point of view, is that going to really have an impact on supply for people that like their California wines? I mean, and the price that they may be forced to pay was that a little bit overreactive by some of the news agencies that thought that would have a major impact on the market across the country? Don't know.
Anybody got an idea? We saw all the pictures with the big barrels and the wine bottles.
I guess, yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not a big wine drinker, but I guess my question was from a price gouging standpoint to people that, you know, like that sort of thing. Is that something that your retailers are finding this impact them? It sounds like not, because you are shaking your head and not aware of it.
Nothing?
Nothing.
Don't think so. Ed says you didn't think it's going to have a bearing, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Industry publications have not indicated that there's going to be any sort of pricing increase right now. I think that from what I've gathered from people out in California, there were some of the more famous wineries that lost product, but many people store off-site in different facilities, so I think it's yet to still be seen.
And again, I don't want to. We were past the loss. I mean, that the tragic and the thing, but I looked at it from the one lady that was on TV, and it was a family winery, and they can't get insurance, so they couldn't get earthquake insurance, and I just wondered how much it would affect the small business people in the industry on an ongoing basis.
We'll be having more information.
Okay. Well, all right. If there's nothing else, anything else from the committee?
I think this is a testament to the leadership of our esteemed chairman.
Oh, good God. Yeah.
Unanimity of working relationship.
Mm-hmm. There's something. The wheels will run off here after a while. I know. This thing will not continue on. We will be in the ditch probably by the end of next week somewhere. So I feel sure. But thank you for your comments. But I feel sure it will run off the ditch somewhere. All right. Meeting is adjourned. We will call you again. Thank you.